everyone, good day and welcome to today's focus group webinar. Today we'll discuss Zoho CRM's blueprint and how its new features can be leveraged to automate aspects of process management and also make it easier and more airtight. On our panel today, we've got Srivatsav from Blueprint's product management team and Sarvanan who manages Blueprint's engineering. They'll be available throughout the session today for any questions that might come up. I'm Sushmita from the Zoho community team and I will be walking you through a few use cases detailing what challenges these features that we are going to cover today actually do mitigate and how these features can be configured for your CRM. We have pre-recorded today's webinar to make things easier. We will also share a recording of this later on in case you'd like to replay it. But if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A section to ask them and we'll answer them in line. Before we get into the new types of transitions we've introduced for Blueprint, we'll quickly discuss what transitions actually are and how to configure them for a business process. We'll also discuss different business scenarios and possible mandates and automations that can be achieved with Blueprint. We'll discuss business challenges that weren't covered till date and that can now be managed within this process in Blueprint's new enhancements. We'll also go over a few other enhancements that are brought to Blueprint last month and that have now made it easier to set up blueprints. So what does Blueprint do? Well, Blueprint enforces a business process. Whether it's a deal, a task, a quote, or any other record for that matter, there are always multiple steps to it from beginning till end. For example, a deal could have so many stages that are captured right within the deal's pipeline itself. And while the deal is moving through each of these stages, so many additional other things need to happen. For example, contact needs to be made with the deal through a meeting or call or through email. Related records might need to be created at different stages. For example, a particular quote might need to be created or a related document needs to be created and sent at a particular stage. In addition to all of this, follow-up actions might also need to be performed right after a stage is crossed. For example, an email with a status update or a field update that needs to be performed. Through Blueprint, an admin can map out all the processes that need to be performed between any two stages, and this can be done consequentially as a record moves through each of these stages. Otherwise, without a process in place, all of this needs to be manually done. In addition to all of this, automatic actions can be configured through Blueprint to happen after each stage has been changed, so that it wouldn't have to be manually configured. Not just this, once the Blueprint process is mapped out, the admin can also map out different possible scenarios or different possible paths that the record can take across different combinations, which all together come to form the entire business process. There are two major aspects to a blueprint: states and transitions. States are steps in the business process between each of which processes or activities can be performed. Transition buttons connect two states. It defines the entire process that needs to be followed between these two state changes. So when multiple states and transitions are configured across different combinations, the entire business process is configured. Let's look at a business scenario to understand this a little further. Our example is that of a real estate property seller agency. Here are the overall stages a deal goes through before it's closed. Between any two stages here, there are several actions that the user needs to perform for it to move to its consequent state. Once a business process is defined, it can be broken down into multiple stages or states that the record can stay at between sets of actions or transitions. For example, between the property staging state and the scheduling and open house state, there could be a lot of processes and activities that need to be performed that can be covered within a transition. The first step to creating a blueprint is choosing which module and pick list field the blueprint will use. When a blueprint is created, a pick list field can be chosen with different values, and each of these values being each particular state. A status field in the module, for example, is generally used, but any pick list for that matter can be used based on the process the blueprint is supposed to mandate. For the deals module, for example, once we've selected our layout as well, for the deals module, for example, the deals pipeline can be ideally used. This maps out the deal process from start to end. Let's create this blueprint based on this pipeline, and all the pick list field values, or in this case the pipeline values, will be displayed as states that can be used to create the blueprint. Let's now look at two states from the deals pipeline that we have configured and the processes that need to be performed as the state changes. For example, once the properties profile is analyzed and we've decided that it's a right fit, a contract needs to be signed. And before all of this, a lot of other processes need to be performed. For example, a meeting needs to be set up with the seller, and an initial estimate needs to be provided of all the services that will be available, and also what kind of commission the seller would have to pay the agency. The contract is signed, and any data that has been extracted during this meeting will be updated in the deals page, such as any initial deposit they have paid or any additional requirements. Once the contract is signed, notes should also be updated within the deals page by the agent. In addition to this, once the state is changed, an email would need to be sent out to the property owner with the details, and they'd need to coordinate with the team to get started on staging, marketing work, and other activities with respect to the seller's requests. Without blueprint, all of this would need to be done manually by the sales agent without any guided process, which means each one of these associated items would have to be manually created. Each field would need to be found and filled individually, and beyond all of this, the stage would also need to be changed manually. Throughout this process, a lot of things could occur. They might skip steps that are necessary for the business process to smoothly occur. There could be unnecessary delays overall, which could result in the loss of the deal. And beyond all of this, the agent might forget to perform any or many of these actions and might actually need clear instructions on what process to follow and which order these actions need to be performed in. Any emails that need to be sent out or any tasks that need to be created after the state change will also have to be manually done and might often be missed out on. When a blueprint is configured for a business process, the transition buttons for that particular state is displayed in the record details page. So essentially over here, transitions not only connect multiple states together, they also display as buttons to the sales agent that holds all the mandatory information that needs to be accessed by the user and also the mandatory actions that need to be performed by the transition owner in order for the record to move to its next state. So all the actions that we spoke about earlier that needs to be manually performed by the user can be mandated within this transition button and will be displayed to the user once this transition button is selected. Essentially, transitions act as paths between two states, mandating actions along the way. And in our earlier example, when two particular transitions are mapped, each to different states, different actions can be configured for each of them, which gives the user different paths that the record can follow at any particular state. Transitions make it easier for the agent as the available paths are already defined, and here the agent doesn't need to figure out what needs to be done next. And within each transition, like we showed earlier, all of the fields that need to be mandatorily filled and the records that need to be created, as displayed here, will be mandated within the transition. So the transition owner won't be able to skip them or forget to perform these actions. Additionally, the agent doesn't need to change the state or stage manually, or whatever pick list field value is selected. It doesn't have to be manually done, and it's automatically changed once the transition is complete. Let's now look at creating a transition. Transitions have three components to it. Before, which indicates which records can enter the transition and who can perform the transition. During the transition, which allows a description field to include include instructional text to the agent, mandation of components including fields which need to be filled a certain way using validation, creation of associated items, defining a checklist of items that need to mandatorily be checked by the agent, or a widget that can be created. After the transition includes automated actions once the transition is completed and the state is changed. Email notifications can be configured along with creation of particular tasks automatically, fields to be updated with a certain value, webhooks, custom actions, or tags that can be added. Let's look at creating this transition that was displayed earlier. Between the profile analyzed and the initial contract state, the transition that we want to create is initial agreement. These are our three components to the transition: before, during, and after. As there is no specific criteria for this transition to be displayed, we are going to skip the criteria option, and we might additionally want to also add another user who might need to, whose expertise might be required to create the code or for this transition to be displayed to a particular user role for that matter. So we have chosen our transition owners and we go on to during transition. So in the during transition, there are, there are certain fields and associated items and checklists that we won't update. This is because during the finalization meeting with the property seller, there are a few details that needs to be captured. A few fields for that matter, such as the marketing strategy that will be used, a commission rate that goes to the agency, and in an ETA for the listing. In addition to this, during the transition, a checklist of topics to be discussed needs to be provided to the agent. This guides the agent through the conversations and discussions with the seller and mandates that certain aspects need to be covered before the state can be changed. Okay, so in addition to this, other associated items need to be created and as well. For example, a quote would need to be created for the marketing activities that are agreed during this discussion. We choose our layout that we want a quote to be created for, and the quote fields that mandatorily need to be filled in by the agent who is creating them. Additionally, we also mandate that notes need to be filled about how optimistic or any other characteristics of the meeting that needs to be added by the agent to provide context to the other users who will be working on this deal. In addition to this, if necessary, an instructional message can also be provided to the agent on what steps to take and how to proceed with this. The order of filling these data fields or mandating these processes can be updated based on this reordering option right here. After the state is changed, a task can be created with the marketing team to raise any requests that are necessary, or email notifications if they aren't necessarily need to be sent out either internally or to the seller can be automated. Before we move on to Blueprint's new transition types, that is parallel transitions and multiple transitions, let's look at a few enhancements that are meant to make it easier for the agents who use Blueprint transitions. Let's look at our earlier example. We have initial agreement, which is the ideal scenario, and we also have property withdrawn. In addition to this, we also are adding another transition called reject property. Okay, so here reject property can be used when the property fails to accept, the property owner fails to accept the contract that is drawn up, or for some reason the sale isn't going through. So in this process, between these two states, we have three options. We have initial agreement, reject property, and property withdrawn, which are our three transition types. Initial agreement is the ideal scenario, and the other two aren't so much. Blueprint now provides color coding options to assign particular colors to transitions. This helps indicate transitions based on whether they are positive or negative, whether it's a best case scenario or worst case scenario, or based on any other internal color coding scheme based on the process stages. Let's look at how color coding can be configured. In our example, initial discussion is our ideal scenario. So let's say we mark it in green. Additionally, reject property being a more negative transition can be marked in red. So, and property withdrawn can also be marked in a similar color. Now that this is being done for each transition, the transitions are more contextual to the user who is performing them and will easily be able to select the one that based on the color scheme that we have selected. Our second enhancement has been widely requested across the Zoho community. In our example earlier, our transition options are initial agreement, rejecting the property, and property being withdrawn. The probability of rejecting the property is kinda low. The agency does it only when their asking price is impossible or because of some other very niche reason. The property withdrawing happens often, but not as often as having the call with the seller and hammering out all the details of the agreement. So, when several actions are available, several transitions are visible to the agent, and when you bring in common transitions as well, it could get a little confusing for the user to pick the right transition. Blueprint now offers the ability for the agent to order the transitions in whatever way. Blueprint now offers the ability for the admin to order the transitions between two states in whatever way suits the process and makes it easier for the agent who is performing these transitions. Blueprint orders the transition based on the time it was created. The first transition that's created comes first, and consequentially the other transitions. But when you go to the state that the transition originates from, you can reorder the transitions as you wish. We want initial discussion to be first, property withdrawn second, and reject property last. And now this order will reflect for the agent who is performing the transitions. Parallel and multiple transition types help with two very important aspects of process mandation. Parallel transitions ensure that processes that need to be performed simultaneously are done. This ensures that all processes are brought under the blueprint and umbrella and are enforced. This includes processes that could have been left out because they needed to be parallelly done with respect to a transition that was already configured. Multiple transitions provide the flexibility to build transitions, allowing the user to choose between different processes between two same states. Our first challenge is that in our earlier example, the same transition includes field updates that need to be performed, creation of a document that needs to be signed, and also an entire quote, in addition to the checklist that we had created. The transition is not only heavily bloated, the processes happen one after the other when ideally they should be performed in unison to avoid any delays. The drawing up of the document that needs to be signed takes time, and instead of waiting for all the fields to be filled, the auditor should ideally be able to get started on creating this document in parallel while the other aspects of the transition are being done. We have a second problem with respect to the transition that was created earlier. Say in the same scenario, there are multiple ways to reach the next state, that is, to the contract signed state. And this is based on the deal that comes in. There are different processes involved. For example, say that depending on whether the seller is exclusively allocating representation rights to the agency or if they are keeping their options open and will list their property with multiple agencies, the processes differ. For example, when we set a blueprint earlier, we also enforced a commission to agency field. Over here, for exclusive agency listing, the commission rate is lesser. Ideally, it should be about 5 to 10%. However, if the property does sign for multi-agency listing and keep their options open, the commission rate will be over 10% and below 15%, which is a bit more commission than if they had exclusively signed with the agency. This is because more resources are spent into strategy and the process is tighter and faster in finding the right buyer. So when a single transition is created for both these scenarios, a field validation cannot be set up for the commission to the agency based on percentage. We'd have to leave it open-ended. Ideally, two different transitions should be available between these two states where The commission to the agency can be validated with each of the processes having different values. That is, the commission value should be 5 to 10% for one type of process and 10 to 15% for a different transaction type. Additionally, other process changes varies for both these scenarios as well. For multi-agency listings, there are more hands on deck, so more transition owners will be available. The contract details also vary between both these processes, as does the marketing options that are involved. These are some of the reasons why multiple transitions are a necessity. They provide the flexibility of a process that is required between two states. Let's look at both of these challenges individually, starting with parallelly performing these transition actions. Parallel transitions allow sub-transitions to be created within a parent transition, and it allows individual criteria and individual transition owners to be assigned to each of these sub-transitions. It provides a clear distinction of processes and also subsequent record details that need to be updated, all of which can be now done side by side before the next state is reached. Let's take an example to understand these challenges a little further and why parallel transitions are so important. Let's take a scenario. Our states are contract signed and property staged. So between these two states, there are other processes that need to be completed before the next transition can be performed. After the property is surveyed, an estimate of the repairs that needs to be done and also an estimate of the staging costs needs to be created and sent to the property seller. Additionally, all the record details are uploaded to the record details page, which is the deals page, and are required to be verified by the seller in order to be ready so that when the next stage, that is listing the property, arrives, the right information can be listed on the website. Additionally, a design request for listing the microsite needs to be raised and work needs to be begun in order to be able to list this property once the photos are ready. All of these processes need to be completed simultaneously before reaching the next state, so that once photography of the property is done, the property can be instantly listed and not wasting time. This reduces not just the seller pulling out of the sale, which could very easily happen because of delays, but also any other interested buyer who might originally be interested in the property but doesn't get a chance to because of this delay. While in Blueprint's current scenario, this should be created as a single transition, but there are a few problems to this. The fields involved during staging are a lot. Staging services, inventory list, staging budget. We also need to mandatorily update notes. A quote for staging costs and quote for estimated repairs needs to be created, and a checklist of items that need to be taken care of during the staging process. Additionally, while verifying the records needs to be a portal transition, and we would like the seller to verify the records before the listing is done on their own. In this case, we can't have the entire single transition, which includes all these details, to be added as a portal transition, as this would mean that the portal user, that is the seller, would be able to access all the other transition actions that we have mandated. And thirdly, while the task to create the design request can be included in the main transition, we don't really have a clear definition of who is supposed to create the task for the design request, and this is very inconvenient. Beyond all of this, if the design request is raised too late in the process after staging, that is, since it goes at the bottom of this, it delays the entire property being listed. Overall, all of these processes are important and they should all be performed in parallel. We can't rearrange any of these processes to come one after the other. Parallel transitions means that instead of creating all of these actions within a single transition, the whole thing can be broken down into individual sub-transitions and can be mandated to be performed parallelly by the transition owners. So now let's look at creating this massive single transition, which includes all these processes, into individual sub-transitions. This being a sub-transition, this verifying of record details as a separate sub-transition and website task creation as a separate sub-transition into one parallel transition in our blueprint process. A transition can be chosen to be a parallel transition when it's being created. Additionally, a plus icon will be visible when you hover over a transition. Over here, additional sub-transitions can directly be added to existing transitions and it can be created as a parallel transition. But for our example, let's create a fresh parallel transition. Select it to be a parallel transition. And our parent transition is created. The parent transition has two aspects, before and after the transition. Before the transition includes the transition owner, or which in this case is the record owner, and we'll stick to having our transition owner as a record owner, and also criteria, where we can define which records can qualify to enter this transition. This transition is meant to be available for any records that come in. So let's stick to it. And our second component over here is after the transition. So after the transition includes post-transition automated actions, where we can automate email notifications, tasks, field updates, and more. For example, a task can be created to raise a photography schedule request for the staged house once the staging is complete and once all these sub transitions are complete. Let's skip it for now. One thing to notice about the parent transition is that during transitions is not available. The during transitions, which mandates processes in Blueprint, is generally only available in sub-transitions, and that is because each of these details are captured only within the sub-transitions. The sub-transitions are what appear as buttons to the sales agent, so any input from the user is captured only within the sub-transitions. Let's now create our sub-transitions. For our first one, okay, this is our parent transition. So, all right. The parent transition owner is automatically filled in. Any other transition owners that need to be added can also be added to the sub-transition. And any criteria that needs to be fulfilled in order for this sub-transition in particular to be displayed can be configured. In during transition, we have a few items that we need to configure. First, during the staging of the property, a mandatory quote needs to be created by the user. The quote is meant to go over the cost of repairs and staging for the property. we can mandate the fields that need to be filled in by the agent who is creating the code. Additionally, we also want to mandate that certain fields are filled in during this transition, that is, staging services to include the services that are being consumed by the seller, a list of inventory that is procured from the original house, and a budget that's allocated for staging. Additionally, a checklist needs to be created so that all the activities that are involved during staging are taken care of. All right. In addition to this, we would also like to make notes as mandatory so that the agent who is taking care of the staging can also provide a status update on any other details that need to be included with respect to the staging being done. Our second transition, or second sub transition for that matter, let's call it design request. So here our transition owner is someone from the design team, most probably the design head, who will not only create the task for the website design request, but will also allocate the task owner, due date, status, and more. In addition to this, a field can also be mandated to be updated over here, detailing whether a visual tour of the house will be created or not. Our third sub transition over here is the portal transition, where we want the seller to verify their own details before the property is listed. So over here, we choose our user, transition owner to be a client portal, and here we can mandate, we can include a message with we can type out a message that is required, and also insert merge fields with any details of the property that need to be included and verified. etc. In addition to that, we create a checklist that the seller would need to verify. Etc. Now we have created our parallel transition. One point to note during this whole process is that during each of these sub-transitions, only before and during the transition options are available. The sub-transitions are displayed. Our third sub-transition is a portal transition where the property seller verifies their data before it's listed on the website. We choose our owner to be a portal transition and select the portal we want this to be associated to, and we choose any field that needs to be updated by the seller. For example, if we would want any personal details to be added or any other property related information or banking details that needs to be updated as well. In our case, we'll simply create a checklist. The checklist will include a list of details that need to be verified before it's listed on the website. And those are our 3 sub-transitions. One point to note is that sub-transitions allow during transition mandates, but automatic actions that are available after a transition aren't available here. The idea is that parallel transitions are meant for processes that need to be performed parallelly. Automated actions are triggered only when there is a change in state of the record, and state changes are contingent on all sub-transitions happening, which means every single sub-transition that is defined must be completed in order for the record to move to its next state. So any post-transition actions that needs to automatically happen is configured in the parent transition. Let's now look at our parallel transition, which is visible here. Each of our sub-transitions are categorized parallelly under the single parent transition, which does not display as a button. The individual record owners can access the record and only view the transition that is displayed to them, and can all work on it parallelly. For example, the design head can simply create the task for the design request to be raised for the website listing, the client portal transition. In the client portal transitions use case, the seller can log in and can simply verify all these details from the portal end. One nice point to note is that when a transition is completed, for example, if the design head creates this task, just because one of the transitions is complete, it does not mean that the record can move to the next state. All these 3 sub-transitions need to be definitely completed before any state change can happen. Alright, so now that we have looked at how parallel transitions can be configured, how all processes that needs to be parallelly done can be configured in separate sub-transitions, let's look at multiple transitions. Let's look at a new scenario right within our real estate process that we have chosen. This is how our blueprint process looks. Between any 2 states, only a single transition is currently available. At most, sub-transitions can be created within a parent transition as a parallel transition. But overall, between any two states, only a single process or a single transition or a single path, if you have it, is available. Well, multiple transitions provides the flexibility of creating multiple transitions between 2 states. So the agent has an option, or the transition owner has an option on which transition needs to take place. Why is this a possibility? Well, let's look at that. In our new scenario, once the buyer and the seller have come to an agreement about a listing price or a price that they agree upon for the property, and the contracts are drawn and negotiation is complete, the deal reaches the inspection complete state. Over here, the buyer has the property inspected professionally. An inspection report is provided and the findings of this report are taken a look at. If there are any findings of damages or repairs that needs to be completed, a change in the terms needs to happen. Either a renegotiation is completed beyond which the price of the property overall is modified and all the documents and contracts needs to be drawn up again or modified. Alternatively, an estimate of the repairs or changes that needs to be made are created and an agreement is specially drawn up for this, where the seller agrees to perform these modifications in the property and also maintain the original price that they had agreed upon. Here, although the end state for both of these transitions are the same, ready for escrow, the process varies. There could be other transitions that pass from the original transition, which is inspection done, but those transitions lead the record to a different state. For example, if the buyer pulls out of the sale, the record moves back into finding a new buyer for the property. But between these 2 transitions, ready for escrow and inspection done, these are our two possible processes that can be done. Perform repairs, which involves an agreement being drawn up. It also involves a field that tracks the repairs which needs to be updated within the deals module, and a quote for the repairs that needs to be created and sent. Additionally, while all of this is done, a task is created to raise a request for the repairs to be started. Our second possible scenario is that the pricing field within the deals module needs to be modified and all the documents that are involved needs to be modified if there is negotiation happening, and areas where the amount needs to be modified are done. In addition to this, any emails that needs to be sent out to both the buyer and seller are also sent. Without multiple transitions, both these processes needs to be combined within a single transition between these two states. Here are the challenges. Most of these mandatory fields and checklists are different. So if a single transition were to be defined between these two states, all these can't possibly be mandated as scenarios vary and a choice between these two processes are necessary. Automatic actions after the transition is complete can't be configured because the automatic actions that needs to be created, for one a task that needs to be created and for the other process an email that needs to be sent out are different. So neither of these can be configured. They have to be done manually. If only those fields that are common to both of these processes are included in the transition, a lot of fields that needs to be mandatorily filled or a lot of the records that needs to be created, associated records that is, would be left out of the transition. This defeats the whole point of creating a mandated blueprint process because most of the mandatory process is not done. Multiple transitions in Blueprint allow multiple possible transitions to be defined between two states. This gives the transition owner the flexibility to choose between these two paths or processes or transitions that the record specifically needs to take, which is right for that particular record in order to move to its next state. Let's create a transition, a multiple transition that is. These are our inspection complete state and are ready for escrow. Let's create our first transition, which is perform repairs. We'll mandate that a new document needs to be signed between the buyer and seller, agreeing that the repairs will be done. In addition to this, a quote will be created with an estimate of the estimate for the repairs that needs to be performed. In addition to this, the deals module needs to be updated with this information. So any repairs that have been updated will be included within the deals module as well. We can also automate that a task can be created for a request to be raised for the repairs to be completed. Our second transition, that is negotiation. It includes the agreed upon price to be modified in the deals module for all consequent activities. Additionally, we'll create a checklist of all the documents that need to be modified or verified before the next step can be proceeded with. If any email notifications needs to be configured to be automatically sent out to the seller or buyer, that can be configured as well for when the state is changed. Let's look at how multiple transitions show up for a deal that has reached inspection complete state. These are the transitions available, and here we can see perform repairs and negotiation leads to the same state that is ready for escrow. So if a seller agrees to perform the repairs, that can be done, or if negotiation is performed and finally the price is modified, that can be changed. The documents can be modified and its checklist updated, which moves the record to its next state. Multiple transitions provide the flexibility required to have multiple possible process options that the record could take between two states. Parallel transitions, as we discussed, allows parallel processes to be completed between two states. In some scenarios, both of these are a possibility. That is, a record could not only take different paths, but the path it could possibly choose requires multiple activities that needs to be performed parallelly. Take, for example, the mortgage process. As the documents are being verified, other processes are settled to ensure that everything is in place before the loan process starts. In case of mortgage properties, as documents are being verified, a mortgage payoff process needs to be completed, as well as a payoff document or a payoff statement needs to be created. If the property isn't a mortgage property, only those documents essential to the loan processing will be collected in addition to the existing vital documents, such as certificate of title, HOA documents, disclosure documents, and utility information. In this case, we would have to create two separate transitions between the same state. One of them will include a parallel transition in case the property has been mortgaged in the past. Let's now create these combinational transitions or multiple transitions. Over here, we'll start with our first transition, where all we are mandating is a checklist of the documents that needs to be verified. And that is it. For our second scenario, when the property has been mortgaged in the past, we will have to create a parallel transition that also simultaneously verifies the mortgage details. For our first transition, we'll simply clone the previous. For our first transition, we simply clone this transition, and our second mortgage Here we mandate that attachment to be mandatory to ensure that the any that the document that ensures that all dues are paid off and that accounts and statements need to be uploaded. In addition, we'll display a message to guide the agent on the processes that needs to be done. And there we have it. In fact, multiple transitions comes in handy even more so when transition criteria comes into play. Generally, multiple transitions allow multiple paths between two states. But Blueprint is a process enforcer, and sometimes users would like to enforce which of these transitions ahead of the user between the same two states are more applicable and for the record based on the record details. At any stage of the business process, when a process needs to be enforced, we'd want the right process to be displayed to the user. In the event of multiple transitions, we want the agent to choose the right transition based on the record details. Transition criteria goes a long way in ensuring that only the right transition is chosen, as transition criteria mandates that the transition is displayed only if certain record details are met. For example, over here, we wouldn't want if the property is the mortgage property, we wouldn't want this option to be displayed to the agent at all, since we'd want the record to go through document verification and mortgage verification. So we can configure criteria for document verification for document verification, the standalone transition to only be displayed if the property is not a mortgage property. Alright, so now let's look at how our combined transitions display for a deal. This is our combined transition. This is our combined transition, and if the property is not a mortgage property, we'll be able to access this transition as well, or else this parallel transition would need to be completed. Alright everyone, thank you so much for joining our focus group webinar where we discussed blueprints, new enhancements including parallel transitions, multiple transitions, and using both of them together.